All right, so get ready, because today we are going deep, deep into some seriously shadowy stuff.
Yeah, this one's a doozy.
We're talking about the CIA's MKUltra program.
Oh yeah, MKUltra.
You sent over some excerpts from MKUltra, the CIA's LSD experiment. Was it really for mind control?
That's the one.
And, well, the title kind of says it all.
It does, doesn't it?
But let's unpack it. Like, what exactly was this whole mind control thing all about?
Well, you got to start with the Cold War. I mean, picture this. The
Yeah.
U.S. just finished with World War II, and bam, they're facing off against the Soviet Union.
A whole new ballgame.
Entirely. And the Soviets, they were pros at propaganda, masters of psychological manipulation, you know.
And then you throw in stuff like Operation Paperclip,
Oh, right.
where we brought in all those former Nazi scientists.
Some of them, yeah, with some interesting expertise in interrogation techniques.
That probably didn't help the tension, huh?
Not one bit. And then to make matters worse, you have American POWs coming back from Korea.
Oh, yeah, the Korean War.
And they seem totally brainwashed, confessing to crimes they never committed.
Spooky stuff.
Spooked the CIA right out of their socks. They became obsessed. They had to figure out, one, how to defend against this mind manipulation.
I bet.
But two, even better, how to use it themselves.
Sounds like the plot of a spy movie.
Well, life imitates art, I guess, because enter MKUltra.
In 1953.
That's when they
Bring
bring
it Sidney Gottlieb, right?
You got it. Sidney Gottlieb, chemist extraordinaire.
Known for his work with, well, let's just say, not the most savory substances. Toxins and mind-altering stuff.
Yep, he was the guy for the job. And that's when things take a turn, a dark turn.
Okay, so the CIA's big hope, their magic bullet, LSD.
LSD,
I
babe.
thought it was the key to mind control, right? Like a way to crack open the human mind.
Crack it open, maybe even erase it completely. They weren't messing around.
But their reasoning, I mean, LSD, it's more than just, makes you see things.
Oh, absolutely. They theorized that it could break down someone's personality, wipe the slate clean, make them suggestible to new ideas, new identities.
New identities, that's getting a little creepy.
Oh, it gets creepier. Because to test all this, they needed, well, test subjects.
Here's where the ethics get hazy.
Hazy. We're talking obliterated.
They were dosing unsuspecting prisoners, mental patients, even their own CIA agents with LSD.
And not in any controlled clinical setting, mind you. We're talking about situations that cause serious psychological harm.
Oh, wait, how did they justify this?
They saw it as, well, national security. They were in this ideological war with the Soviets, a war for the minds of the people.
That's some serious justification.
To them, these experiments, however unethical, they were protecting democracy.
Chilling stuff. And then you have the case of Frank Olson.
Oh, Frank Olson, a tragedy.
CIA scientist, dosed with LSD, unknowingly, days later, dead. Fell from a hotel window. Officially a suicide.
But
many believe it was a cover-up. Maybe because of what he knew about MKUltra.
maybe his case just shows the real human cost of these experiments.
It wasn't just limited to government labs, was it? You mentioned they were funding research at, Harvard, Stanford.
Oh, yeah. Big name institutions, Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, you name it, they were probably getting CIA money.
Hold on. So it's some of the most respected institutions in the country, entangled in the CIA's web.
Well, some knew, some didn't.
Whoa. Talk about a tangled web.
It raises a lot of questions, doesn't it? About accountability, oversight, and scientific research. If an agency operating in secrecy is funding research, who's responsible when things go wrong?
Good question. We'll come back to that later. But first, we got to talk about Dr. Ewan Cameron.
Ah, yes, Dr. Cameron, up in Montreal.
His experiments were, well, let's just say particularly brutal.
Brutal is putting it mildly. He developed this thing called psychic driving. It was a horrifying attempt to basically reprogram a person's mind.
Rewire them.
Totally. Imagine you get a dose of LSD and then boom, sensory deprivation. Isolated, bombarded with these repetitive audio messages.
For how long?
Sometimes weeks. And to top it off, extreme electroshock therapy.
Way more intense than standard treatment.
Oh, yeah, much more intense. His patients suffered immensely. Memory loss, amnesia, some were permanently disabled. It's a dark example of how scientific knowledge, even if it started with good intentions, can be twisted into something truly horrific.
It's scary to think about. And all this was happening in secret.
Oh, yeah, top secret stuff.
It wasn't until the 70s that MKUltra started to unravel.
Thanks to some brave investigative journalists and those congressional hearings.
But even then, they tried to cover it up.
Big time. Richard Helms, he was the CIA director then.
Yeah.
He ordered the destruction of most of the MKUltra files.
Whoa. Talk about burying the truth. What were they so afraid of? Were they worried about the ethical implications?
Maybe.
Or was there something even more sinister they were trying to hide?
Well, we can't say for sure.
But it makes you wonder. Thankfully, though, they didn't get all the files right.
No. The Church Committee, that Senate committee that investigated intelligence abuses, they managed to piece together a pretty disturbing picture of what went on.
So let's talk about the ethical fallout.
Mm.
What are the big takeaways from MKUltra in terms of how it violated ethical principles?
Oh, MKUltra, it's like a textbook example of what not to do in research. You got your non-consensual experimentation, physical and psychological harm inflicted on people, blatant disregard for medical and legal boundaries.
Well, good.
And then the lasting trauma the victims had to live with. I mean, come on.
It really makes you question the balance of power between national security and individual rights.
Yeah.
They believed that the communist threat justified their actions.
In their eyes, it did.
But at what cost?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Was MKUltra a necessary evil in the fight against communism? Or was it just a giant power grab, a dangerous experiment that went way too far?
That's a tough question. Probably impossible to answer definitively. But it's a question worth asking, especially in a world where technology is advancing faster than we can even comprehend.
Absolutely. I mean, the legacy of MKUltra, it's a constant reminder that the pursuit of knowledge, especially when it comes to the human mind, it has to be tempered with ethics.
Otherwise, things can go really, really wrong.
You got that right. The potential for abuse is just too great.
So, after all that, did the CIA actually achieve mind control? Or was this all just a giant, misguided experiment fueled by Cold War paranoia?
To answer that, we've got to dive deeper, look at the specifics of what they were trying to do, the techniques they used.
Which is a conversation for part 2 of our deep dive into MKUltra.
Okay, so picking up where we left off, did they actually, achieve mind control?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
It is, but it's complicated.
How so?
You really got to understand what they meant by mind control. It wasn't necessarily like creating, robot assassins.
Okay, so no Manchurian candidate.
Not exactly. It seems their goals, well, they kind of evolved over time.
Interesting. So what were they hoping for in the beginning?
Early on, they were really fascinated by the whole truth serum thing.
Truth serum. With LSD.
Yeah. They thought they could use it to make people spill secrets during interrogations.
So basically like a chemical lie detector.
That's the idea. But it didn't really work out that way.
I can imagine. What happened?
They quickly realized that, well, LSD makes people say a lot of things.
Makes sense.
But most of it, disjointed, unreliable, not exactly a precise tool for extracting information.
So truth serum was a bust. Where did they go from there?
They shifted their focus to something called psychic driving.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned that earlier. Wasn't that Dr. Cameron's thing?
You got it. It was this idea of, wiping the slate clean, erasing a person's existing memories, their personality.
And
then you implant new ideas, new behaviors. They wanted to create, a blank slate, a perfectly programmable mind.
Sounds straight out of science fiction. And honestly, pretty terrifying.
Yeah, the whole thing was pretty out there.
But did it ever actually work? Did they ever get close?
Well, based on what we know, no. I mean, the experiments were, a lot of the time, chaotic, poorly documented.
So no mind-controlled super spies?
Not that we know of. There's no indication they actually managed to, reliably control someone's thoughts and actions the way they imagined.
But even the fact that they tried so hard for so long, that's still pretty disturbing, right?
Oh, absolutely. It really shows the hubris of that time. They thought science could solve everything, even control the human mind. And they didn't care about the ethical boundaries.
And speaking of ethics, you mentioned the Church Committee before. They didn't hold back in condemning those MKUltra experiments.
Oh, no, they didn't. Those findings were a major turning point in how we view human research.
Right. Remind us again what the Church Committee actually uncovered and the impact it had.
Well, they revealed the scope of it all. MKUltra, it wasn't just a couple rogue scientists working in a basement. This was a massive program, well-funded, dozens of institutions, hundreds of people involved. Their report detailed all the awful experiments, the complete lack of oversight, the total disregard for accountability.
That's a lot to unpack. So what kind of changes did their investigation lead to?
A lot. It led to stricter guidelines for research involving humans, more transparency, and then the establishment of those institutional review boards.
So those are the boards that review proposed research to make sure it's ethical.
Exactly, to make sure it respects the rights of the participants.
So in a weird way, the horrors of MKUltra actually did some good.
Yeah, kind of a silver lining, huh?
It forced us to confront those ethical questions and put safeguards in place to make sure it wouldn't happen again.
Exactly. It's a tragic lesson, but an important one. It shows we need checks and balances in science, in government, everywhere.
Well said. Okay, so MKUltra didn't create mind-controlled assassins, but it had a huge impact on research ethics. Any other lasting impacts?
Well, believe it or not, some of the research they funded through MKUltra actually helped us understand the brain and human consciousness.
Wait, really? From those experiments?
That's ironic. Right.
It is. What kind of research are we talking about?
For example, they funded research into sensory deprivation, what it does to the mind.
Oh, wow.
Now, obviously, that research in the context of MKUltra was completely unethical.
Right.
But it's been helpful for understanding stuff like PTSD, developing therapies for anxiety, depression.
Interesting how something so dark could lead to something positive. It's like that saying, it's an ill wind that blows no good.
Exactly.
And then there's the impact MKUltra had on popular culture.
Oh, yeah, it's everywhere.
It's like a symbol of government overreach, mind control, all that.
Countless books, movies, TV shows.
I can't talk about MKUltra without thinking of the Manchurian Candidate.
A classic.
It really cemented that idea of brainwashed assassins in our minds.
It speaks to this deep fascination we have with the whole idea of mind control, you know?
Yeah, that fear that someone could be manipulating our thoughts, our actions.
Especially in today's world where we're bombarded with information, targeted advertising.
Makes you wonder, are we being manipulated in ways we don't even realize?
It's a chilling thought.
It really is. And it brings us back to that question you asked earlier.
Could something like MKUltra happen today?
Yeah, and are there things happening right now, maybe under the radar, that would make MKUltra look tame?
Well, that's the question we're going to tackle in part 3 of our deep dive.
All right, so last time we were talking about MKUltra and whether something like that could happen today.
That's right, those Cold War mind control experiments. It's a pretty unsettling question.
It is. I mean, thankfully we have like way more ethical oversight in research these days, right?
Yeah, for sure. The days of just, dosing people with LSD without them knowing.
Right.
Thankfully, long gone.
That's a relief. But what about, I don't know, the potential for abuse in other areas, like with new technologies?
That's where things get a little more complicated.
Complicated how?
Well, think about all the advances we've made in neuroscience, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
It is. All that stuff holds incredible promise, but it also raises some pretty big ethical questions.
Like what?
Like, imagine the potential for manipulating thoughts and behaviors, but not with LSD or any drugs.
Right.
We're talking about, targeted interventions at the neural level.
Whoa. So instead of a truth serum, you could have a neuro implant that subtly changes how someone thinks.
Exactly. Or, algorithms that can predict and manipulate our emotions, our preferences.
That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
I know, right? But we're already seeing it to some extent.
How so?
Targeted advertising, the social media algorithms, they're already kind of doing it.
But on a smaller scale.
Right. Now imagine that, but way more advanced.
That's kind of scary.
It is. And it's not some evil scientist with a mind control ray. It's more insidious. It's like this slow erosion of our autonomy, our ability to think for ourselves.
Because we're so reliant on technology.
Exactly.
Okay, so then who's in charge of preventing this? Is it the government? Tech companies? Scientists?
I think it's got to be all of the above. Governments need to, establish clear ethical guidelines for research and development of new technologies.
Right.
And those tech companies, they got to be way more transparent about how their algorithms work, how they're using our data.
Yeah, we need to know what's going on behind the scenes.
For sure. And scientists. They need to really think about the consequences of their work. Talk to the public about the ethical implications.
So it's not just about the science, it's about the ethics too.
Right.
Okay, so what about the rest of us? What can we do to protect ourselves?
I think the biggest thing is to be informed. Be skeptical. Question everything.
Healthy skepticism, right?
Exactly. Don't just blindly believe what you're told, whether it's from the government, the media, tech companies.
Good advice.
And work on your critical thinking skills. Learn how to spot misinformation. that kind of stuff.
So basically, take responsibility for your own information diet.
Exactly, and be mindful of what you're doing online, how your data is being used. That's huge.
Yeah, we give up so much information without even realizing it.
We do, but most importantly, talk about this stuff. Have these conversations about the ethics of technology. Demand transparency and accountability.
It's like a call to action. We got to be aware, but we also got to do something.
Exactly. We can shape the future of technology, make sure it's used for good, not for, controlling or manipulating people.
So the legacy of MKUltra, even though it was so dark,
yeah,
it can teach us something valuable.
it reminds us that knowledge and power, even though they come from a good place, got to be balanced with ethics.
That's powerful.
The human mind is a precious thing. We have to protect it.
Protect it from those who would try to control it or exploit it.
Mm.
It's a sobering thought, but it's also kind of empowering. We have the power to shape the future.
Absolutely.
We can make sure technology is used for good.
Well said.
So I think that wraps up our deep dive into MKUltra.
I think so.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. Cold War paranoia, the quest to understand the human mind, those horrifying experiments.
It's been quite a journey,
It has.
and we hope you found it informative, thought-provoking.
And maybe even a little unsettling.
Just a little.
But remember, this quest for knowledge, it never ends.
Keep asking questions.
Keep exploring, keep your mind open. Who knows what other mysteries are out there just waiting to be uncovered.
And that's what the deep dive is all about.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, keep diving deeper